Hello everybody, this is Josh Richardson with Velocity Athlete Development. Welcome to our online training program. We're here today to talk specifically about the stance. We're going to look at a 2-point and a 3-point stance for you guys today. We got Caden Richardson here with us to actually model it for us, so we appreciate that. It's really important that we jump right into this now because we've got a lot of stuff to be able to share with you over the next several weeks. With the stance, it's really important to understand as offensive linemen, we have 8 specific angles that we move through that are crucial for our success out on the field. And the more we can move through an efficient process in moving through those 8 angles, the more effective we're going to be out on the field. So understanding that helps us understand how to set that base, set the stance for us to be successful. So we're going to get started. So Caden, if you would, we're going to start with a good wide base. That wide base is going to create stability for the athlete. Not only do we move through those angles, we take pressure from all those 8 angles that I talked about. And we got to be able to manage a great position in every one of those angles that we move through. So a good wide base is going to help support that. From there, we're going to move into a staggered position. In this case, Caden's going to take a right stagger. Really good for any of our guards or tackles. This is where our focus should be. By putting ourselves in a staggered position, it affords us a couple things. One, it creates stability from front to back. Not only do we have it from side to side now, we have stability front to back. But it also creates a base anytime we're in pass protection. Anytime we take force on from a defender, we're now in a position to be able to handle that force and not get pushed back on our heels. The other thing that it helps us afford is the fact that we also create shin angles to allow us to move powerfully out of our stance in a run game situation. So by putting ourselves in a stagger, we create stability, we create power, and we create a brace for the athlete. Now, at this point, what I'm going to have Caden do, if you can see, we're going to rock back on this heel and turn the toe out slightly. Now, why are we doing this? This is a physiological type of situation. If Caden were going to keep that back foot facing forward, more of a neutral type position, he would have a challenge in being able to keep the full foot or surface of the foot in the ground. Why is that important? Because if we're up on our toe when we're driving out of our stance or taking a pass set, we lose a lot of stability. The ankle itself, this joint is very small. And when it's trying to manage all this size and all this force, it will collapse under that pressure. By keeping the full surface of the foot in the ground, when Caden takes on pressure or delivers pressure, he can apply more force into the ground. Let's put it in a way that might make more sense. If you're in the squat rack right now and you're doing squats, and you got 315, 405 on the bar, are you going to squat up on your toes, or are you going to have the full foot in the ground so you can apply more force in the ground? I think we know the answer to that. So that's what we're trying to achieve by being able to turn this toe out. Now, moving to the next step, the challenge this creates is that it opens up most athletes' hips. Why is that not good for us? This is called a soft hip in our industry. When this hip opens up, the challenge is as the defender applies pressure into the offensive lineman, this hip and body can continue to open up, creating a tighter line to the quarterback. And that's something that's not good for us in our production level out on the football field. So by closing this hip up and ensuring that this is in a closed position, he's in a stronger position to be able to take on pressure or deliver force as well. All right? It also makes him wider, right? And the wider our offensive lineman is, the challenge for the defender widens out himself, right? So we want our hips facing forward all the time. From this point, what I'm going to have the athlete do, he's going to roll his shoulders back and down. And what that's going to do is it's engaging his lats. This muscle group is a large muscle group on the backside that helps support power and speed in the athlete's punch. By engaging it up front while we're in our stance, we create efficiency in our movement patterns. If our shoulders are rolled forward, we are now wasting time and motion to pull them back before we get into the fight. If we already have it engaged, we now have coiled our back and put ourselves in a great position to jump on the defender quicker than what we would typically do in this spot with it not being engaged. From this point, I'm going to have the athlete place his hands on his thighs and keep the arms long and straight. At this point, he will slide down, and if you can, I want to take a view from the side on this one. You're going to see more of a hinge in his hip, and this is super critical because if the hips are rolled underneath the body and more of a posterior tilt, we're putting a lot of pressure on these quads, and that's not effective for us to do our jobs. So we want more of an anterior tilt. You can see what that does. It has a nice curvature in his back. His shoulders are rolled back. We've engaged the lats, and we got got a great hip hinge. This hinge will allow us to take on pressure much more than if it was tucked underneath us, and will help put more weight on his hips throughout the 65, 70 snaps a game, opposed to putting it on our quads, okay? So what you'll also notice from this view is that his stagger, you'll see that his post foot is up, his anchor foot is back, and you can see how the pressure and weight is all centered on his insteps. Again, putting him in a better position to fire out of his stance, whether it's a pass or in run game. Okay, so let's go back to the front view here. What the next thing that I want to be able to showcase is Caden in this 2-point stance, if you could get back down for me, Caden, is his weight distribution. If our weight is off center and we have one weight level, one side of our stance heavier than the other, what's going to happen to that post foot over a series of the game? Again, 65 to 70 snaps on average. That leg's going to get tired. It's moving more weight. It's taking more force to drive more of his body weight every time he comes out of his stance. So it's crucial that we center our weight and make sure that we look more like a pyramid. There's a reason those things have stood on earth for 10,000 years. Their base is better than anything out there. So we want to look like a pyramid. What we also can see is now that we got the full foot in the ground, the weight on our insteps, we have a muscle group that's called our adductors that are engaged. Our knees are inside the framework. We're in a functional and efficient stance to be able to move through multiple angles effectively for you guys out there on the football field. So this is what our 2-point stance is going to look like. This is what we want you to achieve at home. Now I'd like to progress. What's the next phase from this? We're going to move into a 3-point stance. And don't overthink this, guys. The reality is we've already put ourselves in a good position with our 2-point stance. What's going to be the difference? I need you to get that hand in the ground now. That's as simple as I can put it. So, Caden, I want you to face this way for me. Just for the purpose of this 3-point stance, go ahead and go through that process of the 2-point stance. We got a good wide base. We're going to stagger. We're going to open the door, close the door, shoulders back, slide down our thigh plate with a good hip hinge. Now Caden's going to reach down with his right hand and place it into the turf. Now, what you notice is Caden does not have a ton of weight on that hand, and that's critical. We want to have a good balanced position in this stance. Caden will do something that we call paint the turf. That's how much weight he has on his hands. He's not falling forward, he's not falling backwards. It's a nice balanced position, right? Now, from this position, he's in a good functional spot to be able to do his job. The next thing I want you guys to notice is that I'd like Caden to drive his hips up slightly, a little bit more. There we go, a little more down. That's where we want to be. If our butt is too low in our stance, the first thing that your body's going to want to do is get to a position of power and confidence, and he will drive his hips up coming out of his stance. And next thing you know, your coach will be yelling at you saying you're playing too high. And it's this vicious cycle that we keep dealing with, right? So what will Caden do next time he gets in his stance? Try to get even lower, right? So we want to make sure we start with our hips up in a position that allows you to be confident and powerful coming out of that stance. Do not have your tailbone too low in your 3-point stance. So I'm going to have Caden get back into that position, butt up slightly. A little bit more, there we go, good. Now we have a position where our torso is in a position to be more effective in firing out of his stance. His hips are in a position that he doesn't have to drive them up, but he's driving them forward. This is more of a functional, efficient position that we want to maintain in our 3-point stance. Caden, if you could turn back forward for me real quick. And let's go through that process one more time. We're going to have a good wide base. We're going to stagger, open the door. We're going to close those hips up, shoulders back. Slide down the thigh plate, hinge on your hips, hand to the thigh plate, hand down, butt up slightly. There we go. That's our 3-point stance. And what you should see here, just as what we saw in our 2-point stance, is that our weight should be centered right down the middle. We should look like a pyramid in this 3-point stance as well. So here's some great tips and some skill sets that you got to develop before we can progress and move on into the next phases. We appreciate you joining us. Can't wait for the next episode.